So how do we adapt the model to the individual that we're working with? Good morning. Happy Monday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Ooh, that's good. Okay. Kind of another wacky schedule for the week because of the upcoming New Year's and all that good stuff. So we're going to dive right into today's Q&A. And this comes from DeWayne, capital DeWayne. So I'm not sure if it's one word or two. So we're going to call you DeWayne. I hope that's okay. DeWayne says, after watching quite a few of your videos, your model seems to be quite extensive. Do you find that there's a difference in how you work with higher level athletes like the pros compared to the less accomplished or developing athletes? In other words, do you adapt the model to the athlete in question? So let's talk about why we even have a model in the first place. The first reason that we have one is because things are just way too complex for us to understand. So we have to create a model that allows us to simplify the complexity. And so what we have is we have how and why questions that need to be answered in regards to certain capabilities or structural influences, and then how the athlete in question then produces their performance. And so that's what the model allows us to do. So rather than adapting a model to the individual, what we want to have is we want to have this coherent and comprehensive model that allows us to work with literally anyone. And so when we think about the contents of this model, and we're talking about attributes that may have influences. So this is our wide versus narrow archetypes. This is pelvis shape or foot type. Thorax to pelvis configuration is an influence. Internal force management, breathing strategies, external movement strategies. So when we talk about compressive strategies or compensatory activities, some of these are actually very, very useful for performance. And so we have to take those into consideration. And then we can throw tissue behavior in regards to our stiffness and yielding capabilities. And so what we want to make sure is that we can apply all of these to every situation. So if we're just talking about the high-end performer, one of the things that we want to consider first and foremost with those guys is that they are not average. They are at the one end of the normal curve. So they are special human beings that were born with certain structures and certain capabilities that allow them to develop and demonstrate superpowers. And so we never want to treat them like the average. But what's unique about them is that they have their idiosyncratic structures and behaviors that allow them to produce more speed, higher jumps, and higher force output than your average Joe. So what they actually do for us is they provide us an understanding of what the rules actually are. And so for instance, a while back we talked about the high performance foot and what we should expect to see from that. So let me cut away to that for a short explanation so we can get a representation of what I'm talking about when we're talking about their idiosyncratic structures and behaviors and how they influence performance. As I move through middle, this is where the arch is going to move down towards the ground. So this is your traditional pronation. This is tibial internal rotation. So this is a lower arch. Now, here's the key element of this that I want you to understand is that the maximum force into the ground is at maximum pronation. And where that is, max propulsion is just as that medial calcaneus re-breaks from the ground. And so this is actually a low position of the arch because right after that, I'm going to get a bunch of concentric orientation on the plantar aspect of the foot. This is what they traditionally call that windlass effect. And I'm gonna crank that sucker back into an externally rotated position, right? And that is traditionally considered this high propulsive foot, but the force application came just prior to that. And so this is the demonstration of what happens after that force production. And so when we talk about a performance related foot, this is why we're going to see lower arches on a lot of these really, really high performers. And so people look at these feet and they go, oh, these are really crappy feet, because pronation has always been described as this accommodative foot position, which is not untrue, but the highest force production also happens in maximum pronation. So that's where our max propulsion is. So now if we're talking about training the developing athlete, we still need to consider the same attributes. The model is the same that we would use for the high performer. However, what we might have in comparison to the high performer are a deficit due to structure that the high performer has naturally, or a potential lack of development. And this allows us to now target our interventions for the developing athlete. So let's just say that we had an athlete that was jumping down from a box, and we see the knees moving close together. And so what this actually may represent is knee-centric orientation of the pelvic outlet, which is a low power landing. So where a high performer may actually have a narrower pelvic outlet by structure or the ability to create concentric orientation, this individual whose knees are coming together can't do that. So now what do? Well, this allows us to target our interventions. So what we might do is we might create a compensatory strategy in regards to how we load this individual based on their physical structure. And so in this case, we might use sort of a reverse band box squat initially to teach them how to manage their internal forces more effectively, to actually develop the ability to create the concentric orientation in the pelvic diaphragm by reducing the internal loads. And as we progress this individual through some form of progressive loading from a regular box squat, or eventually some progressive overload on a barbell, we'll eventually move them towards, say, a seated box jump, which allows them to position the pelvis correctly, to produce force, to orient the pelvic diaphragm in such a way to produce greater force, to teach them a more effective exhalation strategy. And so now that's how we raise the performance. So again, the model that we're using to teach this person to create a higher force or higher power output is actually the same model that we would use for our high performers. So again, DeWayne, there's really no difference in how we would apply this. Again, the goal is to create an extensive and coherent model so we don't have to change the model. In fact, if you have to create too many rules, chances are you have an inferior model that you're using. So I hope that answers your question, DeWayne. If not, please send me another question at askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, and then we'll see you guys tomorrow.